Oh man, this level is so cool. I hope it makes it into the final game. Hey everyone, how you doing? So, when it comes to a game with a development history as rich and vast as Pizza Tower, naturally, it's safe to assume that not everything made for the game in its early years ever made it into the final product. These sorts of things could be as small as a few taunts and textures, to as big as an entire boss fight. But regardless, no matter where you look, you're bound to find something really interesting that never made the cut, including levels. Oh boy, you want to hear about a really interesting topic? Well, this is what we're covering in today's video. I want to discuss every single cut and unused level in Pizza Tower along with some extras, and I'll be giving a basic rundown of what they are, as well as their history in the game itself. Think of this video as a breakdown of what these levels ended up being, along with what they were when they were still around. This is a pretty monumental task, so in order to simplify things, I'm covering every unused level in the game's files, as well as any levels that aren't just early versions of some other stages, such as this version of Pizza Scare that never made the final cut. What will be fair game in that department is stuff like Pinball, which is in my opinion, a virtually completely different level than what it ended up turning into, which we'll also cover in this video. So with that exposition and basic explanation out of the way, how about we dive right in and discuss the simple levels. So, this first section is just the early versions of levels in the final game's files, with the exception of 3 that'll be discussed later. We're also following the order of when these levels appear in the modern game. So, Desert is first. And what a level to start us off too. This was actually the longest lasting level to be found in the files, dating all the way back to late 2018. Holy! This level's history is really interesting, because McPig kept building on it and improving it until early 2022, where it was scrapped entirely. The version of this level that exists in the files to this day is seemingly one of the last revisions before it was ultimately axed, and it's pretty easy to tell that this was worked on after the rework build in September of 2021. The overall level's layout is kinda Truth be told, there's really not much I could talk about here that you wouldn't be able to find out by just playing the rework build version. Though the leftover level in the final game has a few enemies that just don't appear, like a pizza car, and there's also no way to access half of the secrets. Oh, and that UFO section is blocked off without no clip. That kinda sucks. Besides all of this, the level is fine enough, and it's fun. But clearly McPig was cooking up something much better with Badlands, also known as Oregano Desert, which is the level that ended up replacing this one, and it reuses basically everything in this iteration of the stage except for the meatball. Yeah, there was this meatball mechanic in the level, and it just got thrown into a secret room afterwards. Pretty interesting, honestly. Moving on. Ooh, this one's interesting. This level is a not-so-subtle early version of Crust Cove, though it definitely looks off. The closest iteration of this one that we could compare to this Frankenstein-like leftover in the final game is the version from Rework Build, but this one deviates by being really difficult to navigate. The textures start completely breaking after a while, and many of the sections in this version of the level were very clearly not built with modern Pepino in mind. Hell, the actual level itself is genuinely impossible because the barrel got nerfed. And a few rooms later, the game crashes trying to load something. Awesome! This one's a very interesting look into what could have been, but I'm not exactly surprised that it looked completely different by the time Eggplant came along. Still though, the idea of starting in the ship is undeniably pretty cool, so I'm glad that the theming was kept somewhat. There's not much more I could say about this one though, so we're moving on. Okay, so this one has a funny story behind it, though you definitely wouldn't know that if you tried to launch a single one of the rooms associated with the level in the final game, since, well, they're bugged. Though honestly, even if you did somehow get it to work, it would be impossible to complete since the entry door is elevated off the ground. Why? Okay, well anyways, this iteration of Golf is a joke level, and it was made in like 7 hours for April Fool's Day in 2019. It was thrown into a March of 2019 build of the game as an afterthought, and as you'll see later in this section, it wouldn't be the only level from that build that still lingers around. With that being said, the level itself is basically Golf, and if you play the unbroken original version of the level, it's fine enough. The golf controls are pretty janky, but besides that, it gets the job done. Though to me, it's just way more interesting to see the version of this level that was never meant for the final game kicking around in the files to this day. Just a really neat story, honestly. But besides the novelty of the level, there's really not much more to it, so let's move on. Oh boy, City. This one's a weird level, so let me try my best to explain it. This level is almost finished, and it's basically just an early version of the Pig City. Or, well, it was scrapped altogether for the Pig City. It's also a version of the level that was apparently right before rework build. But this one's crazy. Okay, sorry, let me back up here. Why is it insane? Well, to put it into the right frame of reference, even the closest version of this level that I can compare clips to, the April 2021 version, is bugged. And if you didn't know what you were doing, you just wouldn't be able to complete the level. I'm not kidding. Look at this key door. How are you supposed to know where that was? Though it's not like that matters much anyways, because many of the assets in the unused file version of the game were either completely cut or reused and remade somewhere else. So instead of talking about the insanity of this version of the level, let's instead focus on what came from this particular iteration that stuck in the final game. For starters, there's an entire clown area that got cut, and this area would eventually be reused in Floor 3's secret room. Additionally, the tile sets for the city part of this level were reused for Pepibot Factory, and that one part in the fake Peppino boss fight where you're outrunning him respectively. Yeah, there's some weird trivia for ya. The reason why I'm talking about this kind of stuff is because ultimately, the level that's in the files is so broken that it's basically unplayable. There's a cop car mechanic here that used to function that would take you to an early version of what would become the Peppino and Gustavo swap part, but it's no longer functional, making one of the harder top ends to get very easy. And then my game crashed because I accidentally went into a secret that doesn't exist anymore. Well, that sucks. Also, half of the level is pitch black, which kinda stinks, but overall, the history of this level matters a lot more to me than the level itself, if that makes any sense. Let's continue. Okay, so these next two are bundled together for a pretty interesting reason. Out of every unused level in the files that made it into the final product, Pepibot Factory is the only main one to have two early versions still present. We'll go in order of these, starting with Floor_3 Room. This is a very early version of Factory, dating back to the previously mentioned 2019 March build of the game. This level nowadays is incredibly broken, since the tile sets are all messed up and the spawn coordinates just don't exist, not to mention the various enemies scattered about had their gimmicks changed. But if you go back and play the old version, yeah, it still functions. There's really not a ton more to say about this one, since the other cut level built on this idea. And that level is Factory, which is a newer version of the idea that dates much closer to launch, with this particular iteration existing during or after rework build. Now, admittedly, I had some issues with the rework version of this level, but that's because rework's controls just aren't great. But because that's not an issue anymore, well, the level's actually pretty fun. The gimmick behind this iteration of what would become Pepibot Factory didn't change too much between this build and launch, though there's some very key differences here and there that make this level stick out a lot. There's a couple of sections in this level where you're thrusted into darkness with a unique backdrop, and in the initial version of the level where the gimmicks were left untouched, these were actually stealth sections. Huh. The hand got changed to being a bit grabbier, but still very interesting. There's also a single block here that prevents this level from being completable normally, as in the reworked build, it dropped down individual blocks to use as platforms. But even with that restriction, the level was pretty neat. It's definitely one of the more playable levels in the files, and even if there's barely any textures for it, it's still kinda fun. I'm a big fan of this one, seeing how it became a much better level in the future. Let's continue. So, you know how I said I didn't really have much to talk about with that first iteration of Factory? Yeah, apparently most of the March 2019 build levels remain in the game files, and they're pretty bugged and boring. This is one of them, and it's a very early version of what would become Oh Sh**. And actually, I discussed this level in great detail in my history video for this very level, so check that out if you want to hear more about it. But overall, I don't have a whole lot to contribute to this discussion besides the tile set being surprisingly intact. Moving on. This level is in the exact same boat as the previous one. It's a very early version of what would become RRF. Truth be told, the most interesting thing I could comment about this level is that it was initially going to be a noise exclusive level, back when the noise was still being included in the base game. So I got the footage of this one with the noise instead. Ooh, okay, let's move on. And to round off our section on old level builds here, Kid's Party is the only floor 5 level to have a leftover in the files. Kind of. We'll get there when we get there. In particular, it shouldn't shock you when I say this level is actually an early version of Don't Make a Sound, easily one of the most interesting levels in the game. And this particular iteration is actually the original one, debuting in April 2021's build. The level focuses heavily on stealth and all that jazz normally, but here, it's amplified tremendously, as monsters can traverse between rooms. That's terrifying. Now, unfortunately, one single room is missing here that prevents this build from being very playable in the final game's files, but if you go back to the initial build, it's functional. I don't think the monsters work the way they should, but I digress. In any case, this level is a very interesting one, and while it's pretty hard to play nowadays, I appreciate it for existing knowing what was to come. Awesome stuff. And that rounds off the section of the video on early versions of existing levels. We do have a couple more technicalities that we skipped, but we'll be discussing these next, with our second focus being on the unused levels that still sit in the files to this day. So let's jump into the first section of this bunch, which is So, Exit is one of 2 levels in the files that were supposed to be the final level, before it turned into the crumbling tower of pizza. The reason why this and the next level I'm covering are in this section is because they're so different from what we got, and unlike a level such as Golf, where the core idea was still there, neither of these levels are like that. They're just so weird. So how about I explain why? Exit was meant for the game during the April 2021 build era, and considering how that version of Pizza Tower has a much bigger focus on combat and speed, you can see how different this level would end up playing out. You start by falling down a huge hole, then you're just running around at the speed of sound. Sorry. Basically, this level is a test of your abilities, and some of the sections here are pretty demanding, like ridiculously so. I understand that Pizza Tower had a pretty decently good player base back then, but I know people now who can't even S rank. How are you supposed to get past some of this stuff? This iteration of the final level uses basically every enemy and every gimmick that was present in the game during this time period, and there's a lot that you have to deal with. Quite a big chunk of the level has to be skipped with no clip if you decide to try it nowadays, since several mechanics were changed and cut and all that fun stuff. Oh, and sadly, one of the rooms crashes the game completely because of something trying to load that doesn't exist anymore. Rest in peace. Exit is overall a very interesting level, and it's quite challenging too. Now, I wouldn't say it's an amazing level by any means. Even playing it in its original build proves to be pretty difficult, since the level itself is just annoying, but I overall think it's a very neat historical piece of Pizza Tower's legacy, as it would eventually lead into another Final Cut level. This one being Top sucks. There's no sugarcoating this here. This entire level is just Exit, but much harder and with rework builds key mechanics instead. And to me, that makes it so much worse. Listen, I understand that a final level should be difficult, and that's a very natural thing to assume in a platformer. I mean, Crumbling Tower of Pizza is no slouch when it comes to difficulty, but look at this. Does this look fun to you? No, it probably doesn't. And believe me, playing it isn't fun either, even without rework build's janky controls. Now, I may sound like I strongly dislike this level, but honestly, I respect it for being the way it is. It's an insane level, but there's a reason behind that, and that reason was to push the game to its very limits to balance things out where changes are needed during this era. Though with that being said, the level still isn't very good. Though it is a pretty short romp, only being 7 rooms long and having 3 extras in the files that suggests it would have been longer if it were fully finished. I'm guessing that McPig realized that it shouldn't be finished, so it just didn't get that treatment, which is probably a good thing. Even still, the level is really unique, seeing as how even Exit had goodies to go for, and this one barely does. It's just a weird level, but I don't have much more to say, so let's continue. Wow, this one's got a hell of a story. So, Kung Fu is an early version of like 3 different levels, sort of. Huh? Yeah, the best way I could describe this one is like the feeling of deja vu, where you've felt like you've faced something before, but you don't know why or how. And this entire level takes that feeling to another level, with how much of it ended up getting reused in other levels and parts of the game. But let's start at the beginning. When did this level even exist? Well, it was made during one of Pizza Tower's quieter times, 2020. More specifically, the first room was found in the data.win file of the Beach and Forest build, which is pretty old, but it didn't end up getting showed to Patreon supporters until April of 2021, and the singular version is really neat, honestly. Just by taking a look at some of the gimmicks this level incorporated, you see a ton of really unique choices made, such as the arena mechanic, which during this time period, McPig was leaning towards combat pretty heavily, and this particular level has a lot of it. There's also some unique enemies here, such as Mr. Carr. Anyways, this level is overall really well put together here, and it's easily one of my favorite cut levels for just how creative it is. And that leads me to how it got absolutely ripped apart. Obviously, one of the 3 levels this got merged with was the Pig City, more specifically the second half of the level with Gustavo and Brick. The setting of Kung Fu is supposedly a Chinatown-like area, and that's basically the exact same environment the duo traverses in a modern level. Though some other assets and backgrounds of this level appear in one of the secret rooms on floor 4, along with the achievement room too, which I dig a lot. So overall, Kung Fu was never fully forgotten by the game, which I really appreciate. I mean, a few segments of this level are still in the files of the game to this day, so it can't ever truly be erased. This level was just a really fun one, and I kind of wish it evolved with the times to be its own thing, though the Pig City is overall a much better level when it has these assets and ideas, so I can't complain too much. Oh, and that's right. I mentioned this level being a part of 3 levels, didn't I? How about we discuss the other 2 next? Yeah, I bet you weren't expecting that, were you? So, Space Pinball basically sucked in some of Kung Fu's ideas, and after that happened, it was heavily retooled into Fast Food Saloon. So in the end, 2 levels died for 1 to be created, though I don't mind that so much, because this level was really odd. It started out really strongly in the 2020 builds of the game, specifically dropping in the Western build first. And here, it's really fun, honestly. The core gimmick behind the level is making Pepino a pinball. Well, somewhat. A lot of this is just basic racing minigames and stuff too, but without the horse, so it feels off. Interestingly enough, this iteration actually has a few cut segments appearing in the final game's files too, which is pretty surprising, as some cut levels don't even have that. But anyways, there's not much else I can discuss with this version of the game, as even the April 2021 version had some very slight revisions that were designed with that build in mind. Which leads us to the Day of Reckoning, the last time this level appeared in any build that we're aware of. Rework. I've already talked about this in the past, but Rework Pinball is rough. And I'm not just saying that because I want to be negative. I haven't really mentioned it in the video besides a couple of levels here and there, but most of the levels that were cut have some insane jank, at least a little bit. So with me feeling the need to point it out for this version of this level, you can imagine that it's not difficult to see. With that being said, a lot of the mechanics that feature in this version of Pinball do end up appearing in Fast Food Saloon, with a couple others being put in later worlds like the Goblin Bots, which were taken from Kung Fu. I'm not entirely sure when this level got cut, but based on the context clues we have, it's not hard to imagine that it got demolished around late 2021, which was for the best. Still though, the idea for this one was awesome, and that goes double for our next level here. Oh, this one hurts a lot, I can't lie. So, Mansion easily has some of the most detailed history across every Pizza Tower level, if we're going down to comparisons. It has a surprisingly rich past, though it's sadly a bit of a tragic tale. See, Mansion started off in January of 2019, in one of the monthly updates that Big Pig was trying to give Patreon supporters at the time, which lasted 1 month. Yep. Anyways, the level itself didn't have much theming when it first appeared, though interestingly enough, grind rails were here, which didn't end up making another appearance until like 2021. Yeah, that's a bit odd. Also, the song here is Hot Spaghetti. Okay then. The level would later be worked on and improved for the March 2019 build, and this one removed grind rails and added just a few more gimmicks. But then we reached the Sage era. And this is where Mansion started getting really weird and really interesting. So from what I know, Mansion was actually around during the Sage demos, but it was never playable. In fact, it seems like it was still in the Blue Block Land era, which was a brief time when McPig was doing all of the level tiles, so everything looked chunky. And yeah, the mansion has an outside now. Oh, okay, sure. Yeah, okay, I'll be honest. All of my footage for this version is from one person who found a mod that recompiled Mansion. And I'm a bit of a skeptic, so we'll just move on to what I like to call Mansion's Dark Era. This era started in April of 2021, where Mansion literally got dark. The previous backgrounds got thrown out of the window, as did all assets except for the essentials. Grind rails came back, which is cool, but everything that you knew about the level before is completely gone. Hell, there's even a new transformation here, the clown. What? This version of the level is bizarre, and things only got weirder in the rework build, where the outside actually does come back. This time around, you can actually see what you're doing until a little further in the level, where you're then greeted by guests and, yeah, all that good stuff. Oh, and also fake Pepino. Yes, he was a level gimmick here. That's kind of annoying. Also, he can soft lock you. Not a fan of this one. Evidently, Mansion lost a lot of its steam as time went on, and it's not hard to see the results of that glaring back at you, especially if you take a look back at the history of the level. Sadly, it just didn't work, and that's a big bummer too, because a lot of the really unique parts of the level were reused in other parts of the game. For starters, the Grandpa Pepper enemy is now in the Pig City as a secret, and old mansion assets are reused for one of the Floor 5 secrets too. On top of this, the absolute banger of a song composed for this level, Groundbound, was put in the soundtrack as a bonus, making it one of the very few cut songs to make it into the game anyways. I am forever thankful for this. Peak. So yeah, Mansion was an overall really interesting level, and I think that line of logic applies to our next level here too. Okay, so to round off the cut levels that were going to be in the game at some point, we have possibly the most interesting one here, at least in concept. Dragon Lair is a very neat level, as it was initially intended to be the Floor 1 boss fight. Level. Yeah, at the time this level was made, the quote-unquote boss fights were really just levels with some sections for bosses. And this one is a really neat concept, as it basically goes through every theme of the first floor while constantly pressuring the player to move forward as fast as possible. You probably noticed the little Power Ranger Toppins following me around, and yeah, almost every minute, Pizza Face comes in and swoops one of them. The more you finish with, the better your score will be, so ideally you want to move through this level as fast as possible, but the controls for this era aren't great. So it ends up feeling just a bit annoying to navigate, but it's overall not a complete hindrance to the level's idea. Also, you probably noticed the flying cheese dragon, and yeah, that got reused in the Floor 1 secrets along with almost every other old or unused enemy in this level. That's pretty cool, I'm not gonna lie. Oh, and of course, Tarragon Pizza, the song made for this level, is also one of the only unused level songs in the final game's official soundtrack, which is just a nice little bonus. Now, with all of that being said, because this level's concept got cut fairly early on, it was basically just brought back in future builds as a bonus level, so I don't have much more to say. Next, we'll move on to a much smaller section, which focuses on the levels that were never intended to be in the final game, but were still interesting enough to give their own sections in the video anyways. So, let's start off with a pretty fun one, that being... Okay, so I need to start off this brief section with a potential epilepsy warning, or at the very least, a flashing lights warning. Oh wow! Okay, if you honestly don't even want to see this, just skip to the next level. I'll put a timestamp here now. But anyways, as for this level itself, it sucks! But intentionally so. Basically, this level was designed for Discord server competition in 2018. 3 lucky speedrunners got the premium pass for the Patreon, which allowed them to get the January build in the following year, which we covered a bit here not so long ago. But as for how the level plays, ugh. Okay, so do you see this pink snowman tile? Do not touch it! It's evil and it resets the level. If you mess up even once, you have to run through the entire thing all over again. This might be the worst Pizza Tower level of all time, and I love it! Maybe it's just the absurdity of how awful the stage is, but it's kind of amazing. And the random post images and GIFs thrown in only amplify the experience. Though because it's so difficult, I ended up getting this footage from a mod that recreates the level. I wish I was kidding about that. Not worth it, the level wasn't fun, but damn is it interesting. Not gonna lie, it's starting to hurt my eyes, so let's move on. Okay, here's an odd one. Snick's challenge only features in one build, the iconic Sage 2019 build, and it's just a mishmash of the 3 main levels of that build, but stitched together and with like no toppings or ingredients to collect. Instead, you're on a cooldown while playing, and Snick is following you at I think Mach 2. Regardless, Snick will always hurt you if he touches you, and your goal is to get through all 3 levels within 10 minutes. There's not really much else to say about this one, because unlike our next level, it never got brought back in a build, and Snick was kind of killed off for the most part after the Sage era. So unfortunately, there's really not much to note about this stage, though I guess the song for it appears in the final soundtrack, which means something, I'm sure. But yeah, let's move on to the final main level I'll be covering in this video. It's a classic. Ooh, this one here is possibly my favorite unused level in Pizza Tower. And I suppose as a testament to how peak it is, it almost completely works in the modern game's files, with the exception of one room, which we'll get to. So basically, Stronghold is a level that was specifically designed for an Xmas Break build released at the tail end of 2019, right after the Sage era. This level is basically a harder version of Bloodsauce Dungeon at the time, though unlike Pizza Scare, which got that same treatment for a Halloween build, this one was actually fun. Instead of going down a long level, you go up a long level, and I have to say, it's honestly really enjoyable. Some of the assets for this one were made by members of the community at the time, which only adds more charm to the overall experience. And there's also a noise boss fight at the end of the level, which is just whack-a-mole, but it's surprisingly difficult. Sadly, it doesn't work anymore though, RIP. It's just a really neat level overall, and I absolutely adore its presentation. And that's kind of all I could say about the level. It returns in many following builds, but always as an extra, and never anything more than that. I mean, come on, it's actually impossible in rework build because wall running got nerfed. Sucks to suck. But with that out of the way, all we have to cover in the video now are just a few random levels and pieces that I didn't think deserved a section of their own, so let's jump right in. Okay, so this is a collection of levels that don't have much to them. Some of them can barely even count as levels, so my thoughts on them are mostly minimal, and maybe 2 sentences tops. With that being said, let's dive in anyways. Early Test Build is the first ever public build of Pizza Tower that we know of, and it's just a mix of John Gutter and Ancient Cheese when it comes to tile sets. It's super primitive, and there's not really much to it, though this level was built upon and following updates throughout 2018, such as a Halloween update that added extra goodies and a challenge level that exists. Oh, and speaking of, Factory Challenge is also a challenge level. That was just a challenge for the factory level at the time. I don't have much else to say. We also have the old tutorial in this section, which is pretty unique, but I can't consider it a genuine level. Even still, the latest version of this one still exists in the files of the modern game, and it's pretty dated. But regardless, it gets the job done. And for some reason, it leads you to the rework build hub world. Not entirely sure why this happens, but regardless, it's a very interesting situation. Even if almost every room crashes the game because in the rework build, every NPC could talk to you. I think it's safe to say they went mute here. There's really not much I can say about this hub that hasn't already been discussed in my previous Pizza Tower video, so we'll move on. There's also a ton of very early test levels that we know about, and while I don't really know much about these, they were still incredibly fascinating in their own rights. These levels in order are level 1, level 1_H, level 2, level 3, level 5, level 66, Area 1, Area 2, Tower 1, and Floor 1. These levels were made to test out a ton of mechanics in various parts of Pizza Tower that we would eventually all come to know and love. Like level 3 testing an early version of Snowman? Maybe? It's so odd, but I kind of love this stuff. Though sadly, with how long this video already is, I'd rather not dive even deeper into the obscure territory, but in the future, I might talk about these super early levels in their own dedicated videos or shorts. And finally, to round out this entire video, we have some levels that didn't even get into the concept stages. Most of these have little to no assets in any builds of the game, so they're quite an interesting set of levels. With that being said, here we have Spooky Apartment, which was supposedly going to be a stealth level similar to Entrance's design, I suppose. Then there's Free Falling, a level which sounds really cool, honestly. Basically, it was going to pull a Sonic level design and make it so that pieces and chunks of the tower would piece together as if they were crumbling down. It's weird, but it sounds like it could have been fun. The oven is also here, and we don't know much about it besides it giving us the Firebutt transformation. Dope. Oh, and there's the Pizza Dream, a super cool idea for a level that was a dream, but a really twisted one at that. It actually gave us 2 music tracks, and one of these appear in the final game's OST, which is pretty awesome. The Living Tower of Pizza also existed, which was an early version of what would become the Crumbling Tower of Pizza. And at this point, I want to pick up the pace. Rapid fire time. Plains was a level that was a rainforest, and it merged with Mansion incredibly early on, so the assets were used for that level instead. Crashed UFO was, to my knowledge, an early version of what would become Deep Dish 9, or that UFO section in Oregano Desert. Regardless, it had a neat concept written up for it, pause to read. Canadian Winter was a winter forest set in Canada. Okay, that's enough screen time for Maple Leafs, let's move on. Lights Out Power Out was a dark tunnel that was eventually remade into the dark segment for City. Circus was also merged into City, but yeah, this was going to be its own level at one point. Cool. Kitchen is a giant kitchen, and this is up for debate, but it might have been added as a segment in Don't Make a Sound, possibly. There was also a Doom-inspired Vigilante level, which was just a level for Vigilante, but he got cut pretty early on in his development. Oh, and Stickland was a theme park for everybody's favorite money-grubbing orange-clad gentleman, Mr. Stick. A lot of the assets for this level were actually finished, which makes its complete removal kind of suck. Oh, and also Pizza Hell and Pizza Heaven. I forgot to mention these. Oops. We have no information, but a friend of mine made an awesome background for Pizza Heaven that I've been using for this section, so yeah. But with that, I believe that's just about every cut and unused level in Pizza Tower, or at least the main game. Many of these levels were either merged into a finished level, or were scrapped from the files entirely, so in a technical sense, I did cover every level in the files that's left over, but I might not have found everything else that once existed. I mean, recently, I heard about the old Noises Hardoween entrance being found, so if you know about any other cut and unused levels, feel free to let me know in the comments down below. Videos like these are never perfect. Also, if you're new around here and you like what you saw, then maybe consider subscribing. It helped me out a ton. Also, I'd like to give some huge shoutouts to my Extra Wi-Fi channel members. And once again, going in descending order, we have Dan B, Nicholas Van Koski, Glitch into Code 867, Johnny Homeowner, Dust Belief Papyrus, Envious, Mop 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 Mop, Ethan the Werewolf, Young Cato, Sploob, Clintuck, Microwave, Plagued, Beeben, The Silases, Francisco Moro, Song, Sad Monkey, Superior Nas, Gaming with Thin, Mystic Ace Champions, Lord 09910, Retroe XDD, Tails Gimmer, Harder DK, Emerald, and Lethal Drama. Alongside my normal channel members, thank you all so much for your continued support, y'all rock. I feel like a lot of those members expired a couple of days ago, but honestly, no, I'm still putting these in the video, you guys rock. And now, as for me here, I'm gonna go play Mansion again. I want to hear Groundbound, okay? Give me an excuse. Anyways, peace.
They must be mad. They must be